What's goody, Shellitronnn here. You can call me Shells, and I'm back at again with a brand new video. And I'm gonna keep it a Bowberry biscuit. There is a big question that Panther Nation has to answer. Well, not us, but the front office of the Panthers has to answer, and that is what to do about James Bradberry. Now, I think James Bradberry and his spot on the team kind of splits the fan base. On one half, the people who think that James Bradberry is a bad cornerback. He doesn't get interception numbers. You can see his stats right here. Been on the team for 4 years. His first year in the league, he had 2 interceptions, 10 passes defended, 59 tackles. Went up the next year, he had 2 more picks, 10 passes defended, 85 tackles. In 2018, just 2 seasons ago, he had 1 interception, 15 passes defended, and 70 tackles. And just this past season, he had 3 picks, 12 passes defended, and 65 tackles. You see those numbers, and you don't see a cornerback who gets a lot of interceptions. Sure, he had his career high this past year, but 3 interceptions is kind of like, alright, but you don't really get the sense that, that's not a ball hawk. That's not a guy who really stops receivers. That's not the dude who can really put the bag on for real. But then there's the other half of Panthers fans who see that, maybe the stats look alright. And look, having double-digit passes defended every single season since your rookie year is pretty impressive. The interceptions aren't really there. He's a pretty good tackler, but there's more to just the counting numbers when you take into account what a cornerback does. And they think that James Bradberry might be a better corner than his numbers may or may not suggest. But there's also the idea that it doesn't really matter how good or how bad to a certain extent you are as a player. When you're a free agent, if you're good enough, you're going to get what the market bears. You don't have to be elite, like a top 3 at your position, to get the highest contract in the league because you're a free agent. And a team that needs a cornerback, who thinks they're a cornerback away or just doesn't want to lose you as a corner, they're going to pay you money so that other teams who have more cap space cannot scoop you up. Because in team building and free agency, it's not just about your stats. It's not just about the price tag. It's about what kind of drop-off in production will the team see over your replacement. So if the team can replace you pretty easily and cheaply, then they can do that. But specifically for the Panthers here, can the team replace James Bradberry's production with a rookie or a free agent who won't cost the amount of money that James Bradberry will? And I'll get to what his contract might look like a little bit later in the video, but I do want to talk about what his numbers are, talking about us being in the hardest, the most competitive offensive division in the NFL, the NFC South. You got Matt Ryan and Julio Jones. You got Drew Brees and Michael Thomas. And you have Jameis Winston. Yes, Jameis Winston, who was second in the league in passing touchdowns. He was also first in interceptions, but he was also number 1 in yards this year. Jameis Winston can air that ball out. It's just sometimes he might throw to you, but a lot of times he'll throw to his guy as well. But he's got Mike Evans and he's got Chris Godwin, so it's a really hard task to defend against both those dudes, and Jameis Winston will throw that ball up. So the question is, just how good has James Bradberry been against the big 3 in our division, Julio Jones, Michael Thomas, and Mike Evans, over the past 3 years? And I will have all these stats in the description below. Where you can find them is a link over there to Pro Football Reference. You can find out all these numbers for yourself. In 2017, in our 2 meetings with the Falcons, Julio caught 11 passes on 23 targets, 198 total yards. His 2 games versus us were 118 yards and 80 yards. That season, he had 4 100-plus yard games, so one was against us, but he had no touchdowns versus us. In 2018, he caught 9 of 14 targets in the 2 games versus us, 92 total yards, 64 yards our first meeting, 28 yards our second meeting. He had 10 100-plus yard games that season and only 1 touchdown versus us. So of the 16 games Julio played in 2018, he had 10 100-yard games. In our 2 meetings with him, he had 64 and 28 yards and only 1 touchdown versus us. Just this past season in our 2 meetings, he caught 11 of 16 targets. He had 157 total yards, and it was 91 and 66 in the 2 games against us. He had 6 100-plus yard games this year, and he had no touchdowns versus us. That was Julio Jones, the top 1 or 2 receiver in the league right now versus James Bradberry. Let's go to Michael Thomas, who's a top 1 or 2 receiver in the league as well. In our 2 meetings in 2017, he caught 12 of 17 targets for 157 total yards. He had 87 and 70 in our 2 meetings. He only had 2 100-plus yard games that season, and he caught 2 touchdowns versus us. That was a good year for him. 2018, he caught 12 of 16 targets for 78 total yards, 49 yards our first meeting, 29 yards our second meeting. He had 4 100-plus yard games that season. No touchdowns versus us in 2018. Just this past season, 14 catches, 20 targets versus us, 138 total yards. Our first meeting, he had 101 receiving yards. Our second meeting, he only had 37. He had 10 100-plus yard games this season. And surprisingly, only one came against us. And he only had 1 touchdown versus us this past season. 3 touchdowns, only one 100-yard game for Michael Thomas versus James Bradberry. That's pretty good, especially when you consider that Michael Thomas also goes to the slot a lot. So those yards weren't always on James Bradberry against Michael Thomas. Now, Julio and Mike Evans tend to stick to the outside more often than Michael Thomas, but Michael Thomas does go to the slot kind of often for the Saints. But let's go ahead and move on to Mike Evans. 2017, 11 catches on 18 targets, 167 total yards. Our first meeting was 60 yards. Second meeting was 107 yards. He only had 1 game of 100-plus yards. That was against us, but he had no touchdowns versus us in 2017. 2018, he had 5 catches on 16 targets, 64 total yards. Our first meeting, 16 yards. Our second meeting, 48 yards. The man had 8 100-yard receiving games that year, and we held him to 16 and 48. No touchdowns versus James Bradberry. Just this past year, 13 catches on 25 targets, 157 total yards, 61 receiving yards our first meeting, 96 our second. So we almost got that 100 yards, but he didn't get it. He only had 3 100-yard receiving games this season and no touchdowns versus us again. In the last 3 years, we've only allowed 4 touchdowns from these big 3 dudes in the NFC South. None from Mike Evans, 1 from Julio Jones, and 3 from Michael Thomas. But this is the guy that is garbage, and this is the guy that we'd rather get rid of and allow who? A rookie to come in and put up numbers against those 3? I don't know about all of that, but on your screen right here, you're going to see some more like second, third level analytics. These are his numbers for the 2018 season. Targets allowed is 123. That's not really a big number. Target separation was 1.02 yards of separation per time he was targeted. That is not very much at all. So he's usually always right there. He was top 3 in pass breakups. He only allowed 5 touchdowns allowed. Now, for some of these stats, it doesn't really give you like the number, like how many qualifying corners. So a corner might have played only 1 snap all year, and they didn't allow any touchdowns, so they might be tied for first. But when you look at these other numbers, like burn rate, he only has a 4.1% burn rate for this past year. Then you look at his coverage rating, he was number 11 in the league in there. Catch rate allowed, 54.5%. Number 11 in the league in that stat. And then we look at this past 2019 season. Targets allowed is 107. Target rate was only 24.5. Target separation was less than a yard per time he was targeted. Receptions allowed was 68. Coverage rating was plus 8.6, so he went down. It was number 31 in the league there. Burn rate was only 1.9%. Catch rate allowed 63.6. That went down. Passer rating allowed was 86.6. That was number 10 in the whole league this past year. So you can look at these numbers here. I have a link in the description below. You can look at those numbers even deeper if you really want to. They're second and third level analytics. But the fact of the matter is, James Bradberry is not garbage. He plays pretty well, and he ranks pretty, he ranks pretty competitively with some of the better corners in the league. But it's not just about his stats, not just about his impact. It's also about the number of dollars. This Panthers team has a lot of holes to fill. And look, the cornerback market, these dudes are getting paid a lot of money. You know, Xavier Howard just got paid. We saw the money Josh Norman got from the Redskins. Tremaine Johnson, I think he's on a 5-year, $72 million deal. The corners in the league who produce are getting paid somewhere between $12 and $15 million a year on their contracts. And you don't have to be a ball hawk. You don't have to be the best of the best in the league. It's like the top 15-ish guys in the league are getting paid this big money. And some of these dudes are guys who got paid like 2-3 years ago, whose contracts are still pretty high. So the number of dollars that each team gets, the cap is always going up. Teams can spend more money, and if you're only one position away, you might be willing to spend a little bit more money to pick up a guy and put him on your roster. So there might be some teams out there who could possibly look at James Bradberry and say, I saw what he did against Julio, Michael Thomas, and Mike Evans for the past 3 years. If we can just get something like that, then maybe our team can step up a little bit and maybe make a deeper run of the playoffs. So like I mentioned at the top, it's not just about stats. It's about being a free agent. It's not just about what he can do for your team. It's about what these other teams in the league, how they value him and what they think he can do for their team. So if you want to keep a guy in a certain level of production versus a rookie or some guy who's going to cost half the price of a James Bradberry and probably going to bring half the production of a James Bradberry, you have to weigh that against what other teams are willing to pay for a cornerback in the league and decide, am I willing to pay this price to keep this guy in Carolina for the future, or risk losing him and that production, knowing we go up against the best quarterback receiver duos in the whole league. Keep in mind, the top 3 receivers in the whole league this year, top 4 actually, were all in the NFC South, and DJ Moore is one of them. So when you have to deal with these guys each and every year, it's very important to make sure you have some confidence in the corners on your team. And just how much confidence do you have in Dante Jackson being the #1 cornerback for the Panthers moving forward? Or a rookie for this next upcoming year and years to come. We know Christian Fulton or Okudah are really big name guys in this draft class. I'm not going to lie to you. I don't know much about the other guys in this draft class. But still, they're going to be rookies going against 3 of the best receivers in the whole National Football League who put up numbers against everyone. Except James Bradberry sometimes. So this decision right here is going to really prove whether or not this team is in complete rebuild mode or trying to retain some sort of talent for the future, something to build around in the secondary, because it's really hard to convince me as a fan that you're trying to win games if you let a cornerback who's basically stopped 3 of the best receivers in the league consistently over the past 3 years. It's just impossible to replace and fill all these holes on the team. The whole defense, at every level of this defense that we have right now, there are holes. Important holes. The O-line does need help. So there's a lot of things that have to happen here for the team to be successful. I don't know what the team's going to do about James Bradberry, but I think this is the one piece, the one player that if he's gone, then it looks like it's total rebuild mode, shut everything down. If he stays, then it looks like we're going to build around him for that defense and have some sort of stopping power for the guys you have to face year after year after year. All guys who have big deals, long-term deals, who we're definitely going to be seeing for the foreseeable future. That's how I feel about it, man. How do y'all feel about James Bradberry? Is he good? Is he not good? Is he worth the money? Do you want to see him gone? Do you think that Dante Jackson can be the #1 cornerback on this team? Or do you believe a rookie coming in can replace James Bradberry seamlessly? No problem at all. Do you think this team can make the playoffs next year? With or without James Bradberry? Let me know all your thoughts in the comments below. And you already know what to do with that like button.
Cheers to you, appreciate the chance. Been told y'all I been the man. Been told y'all I had the gift. Tell a friend to tell a friend. Real ones gonna recommend. Count this as another win.